Good morning or good afternoon or even good evening, everyone, wherever you are, and feel most welcome to this open dialogue discussion about green economy. My name is Ulrika Moder. I am Assistant Secretary General with UNDP in the Bureau for External Relations and Advocacy, and I'm joined with a number of colleagues who will share with you our latest thinking, but also our actions on the ground and how we, in partnership with you and others, can build forward better. Sometimes we use the build back, but I think we're all aware about the importance of moving forward and not going in reverse. And as we are aware, the COVID-19 has disrupted billions of lives and endangered our global economy. We predict the deepest global recession since the Second World War and the broadest collapse in per capita incomes since 1870, a 5.2% contraction in global GDP in 2020. The International Labour Organization expects the global workforce will be hit by the equivalent loss of more than 300 million jobs. And as we know, leading our efforts to look at what we call global human development, we will see for the first time that it's on a course to decline. And this is the first time since the UNDP started to use the concept and measure in 1990. UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, has mobilized the full capacity of the UN system through its 131 country teams serving 162 countries and territories to support national authorities in developing public health preparedness and response plans to the COVID-19 crisis. And we have positioned as a development organization to lead and assist in the global response on a number of fronts in a very fast-moving environment. And we're doing that in coordination with colleagues across the UN system and beyond. And we need to increase partnerships and understand that goal 17 of our Sustainable Development Goals is more important than ever before. To build forward, we need to understand better the impact and have seen a significant increase in the need for the socioeconomic assessments and for guidance to governments on risks and consequences on various policy choices, but also, of course, on opportunities. As you are probably aware by now, UNDP has been given the technical lead for the socioeconomic response, and our country offices worldwide are working under the leadership of the UN resident coordinators and, as I said, in close collaboration with specialized UN agencies, with the regional commissions, and also IFIs and other partners beyond the UN development system, in order to really do a good assessment of the socioeconomic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on economies and communities. UNDP and UN partners has prepared, and you find it on our website, we proud ourselves to be the most transparent UN agency, 117 of these socioeconomic impact assessments in 83 countries and 5 regions. And they paint, as I said before, a devastating picture of the impact of the crisis. Governments, as we know, are preparing, responding, and recovering in different stages, with UNDP increasingly asked how this pandemic and crisis can lead to policies that prevent us from making the same policy mistakes as in the past. And we are aware that the pre-COVID, our people and planet, they were already on a sustainable path, and our COVID-19 response offer reflects 4 thematic priorities and respective policy considerations that speak to the strengths and the expectations of our partners to do things differently. Along with the need for, of course, effective institutions, governance and agency, strong social protection measures, as well as advanced digital solution, the green economy, the topic for today's conversation, is the 4th and critical component of UNDP's COVID response offer, in coordination with other colleagues. The pandemic is, as we know, an existential call for us to seek to restore balance between people and planet, designing and de-risking nature-based solutions as part of a new social safety net for the world. Environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability come together. And we need to encourage sustainable public-private partnerships. We need to include green transport systems in our planning. We need to transform agriculture from carbon contributor to carbon sinks. We need to develop ecotourism and ensure integrated thinking and action with the health sector to tackle air pollution that actually kills 7 million people each year. Today, therefore, as governments determine how to invest taxpayers' money, they have a choice to make. They can stimulate fossil fuel industries and other remnants of the way things were, short-term band-aids that will reinforce the collusion between nature, or they can invest in a sustainable green economy and future. UNDP's green economy includes work with, of course, UNEP, with FAO, with UN Habitat, and many other partners to boost green and resilient recovery by helping translate countries' national determined contributions, the NDCs, and adaptation plans into urban planning, agriculture, and land use climate solutions. Working with ILO and other partners help countries to explore green recovery grants to promote and protect nature-based jobs and livelihoods, including rural entrepreneurship. This is, of course, critically important to show that it is about development. Working with UNEP, IRENA, and other partners, we accelerate also the green energy transition, yet another area that shows that we're talking about development as part of the COVID-19 response, including supporting countries on political economy, on fossil fuel subsidy reform, and see how we can shift investments into sustainable development. We promote community-based and own solutions and approaches, especially, of course, with indigenous communities. And there is much more that UNDP is undertaking with partners to make the right policy choices that will help us to get back on track and move forwards instead of reverse. To tell much more about this and to bring our green economy theme to life and to see the opportunities in the midst of the crisis, I will be joined by a number of colleagues who are doing the actual work together with colleagues in the so-called field in our program countries. And I am happy to hand over to my dear colleague, Adriana, leading our policy work in the policy department of UNDP. Over to you, Adriana.
Thank you very much, Ulrika. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, dear friends. The global pandemic revealed painfully the unsustainability of our development path. As we know it, the world prior to January 2020 was not environmentally sustainable, nor was it socially inclusive and economically resilient. Half of the new diseases that have jumped from animals to humans since 1940 can be traced down to changes in land use, to agricultural expansions, to wildlife exploitation. Currently, zoonoses are responsible for about 1 billion cases of human illnesses and millions of human deaths annually. But epidemics are much more than pathogens. They're about inequalities and the socio-ecological systems in which pathogens take root. So even if we defeat the current pandemic, but we do not do anything about its source, the way humans interact with nature, it is only a matter of time before the next novel pathogen emerges. We strongly believe that the pandemic has the potential to shift incentives to act on ways that were not on the policy table before, not on legal table before, not on regulatory table before, to lift the financial, the institutional and political constraints that had kept the SDGs off track prior to the pandemic. So the actions that we are taking now could lead to these tipping points, which might reshape trajectory for development over the long term. There is a historic opportunity for all of us to move fully to green economy. an economy that leverages the productive assets of our human and natural capital, resulting in improved well-being, in social and economic equity, and environmental sustainability. As we see that the governments around the world are rolling out stimulus policies, these policies will also determine the long-term progress on climate change and on biodiversity. As Ulrika said before, if these policies will promote fossil fuels, they will lock in future carbon pollution. But if they promote cleaner energy, they could set the world on a pathway to zero emissions. As the lead agency of UN socioeconomic response to COVID-19 crisis, UNDP prioritizes the green inclusive economies along with governance, with digital transformation and social protection as our key responses to COVID-19. We are building a green economy global practice, embracing new ways to help countries innovate, partner, and transform systems through strategic policies and investments that recognize the potential synergies between growth and sustainability. Our green economy practice is anchored in the integrated nature, climate, and energy portfolio, which is leveraging partnerships with our sister agencies, such as UNEP and FAO, the private sector, multilateral development banks, IFI, as well as UNDP's Finance Sector Hub. Partnerships to bring fresh ideas, tools, and solutions to ensure governments have the knowledge, have the capacity, have the skills, technologies, and resources to build back better. Today, you will hear from 3 different countries, regions, and perspectives on how they are defining and how they are pursuing a green economy. We'll show you a video which gives examples from Sudan, from Africa region, and community-based recovery efforts supported by UNDP's Small Grants Program, with examples from Afghanistan, Mexico, and Turkey. After the video, the director of UNDP's Nature, Climate, and Energy practice will provide more detailed overview of our green economy offer and actions on the ground. Thank you very much, and over to the videos.
حسدين طعم ريحانة زرعنا طماطم برضو حشيته والبصل هسه برضو زرعناه السنة وزحت لي أنا كده وده طبعا العدد ده برضو أنا زرعته بيدي برا.
Thank you, Adriana, and indeed, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a pleasure for me to be here with you and share with you some ideas and essentially give you an update on where we are in our own thinking in terms of how we can support countries with what is currently the need of the hour, recovery from this horrible situation that we all find ourselves in, but hopefully turn it into an opportunity that will help us move towards the kind of economy that we're all seeking to achieve. And I want to thank all our colleagues for putting together these examples from the field, which I think give a good illustration of what the requests and needs are from countries, which there's a calling for all of us to respond to. But before I go into providing a little bit of an overview of UNDP's work across nature, climate, energy as it relates to the green recovery issue, as it relates to green economy, I want to reflect on a couple of points which I think hopefully will set the scene for the discussion that we will have in a while. I think the first thing is, I think we have to remember that at the end of the day, the impacts of COVID as they are felt amongst peoples around the world really relate back to the basics: food security, access to energy, access to clean water, access to education, good jobs. I mean, these are all the need of the hour before COVID struck. COVID has just made it even more challenging. But it is important to understand why we need to focus on the basics when we talk about green recovery and green economy, because for many of our counterparts, colleagues, people that we're serving, these are the priorities that foremost on their mind. Secondly, COVID is a global challenge that really requires a concerted global response, and one which multilateralism is ideal to address. But we also need to remember, I think, that this is affecting different countries and different regions in very different ways. So there isn't a one size fit all solution that we can think of. We must be able to address these context specific needs. And this is the reason why we selected these videos to share with you, because context does matter. We know that many countries are still, in the immediate crisis response mode, and indeed are facing multidimensional crises. This has simply aggravated existing pressures that they were already feeling. And those that face the harshest threat from the pandemic are also those that can least afford to withstand its shock. So when we talk about green economy, I think first and foremost, a green recovery, we need to talk about it in the context of the realities of what countries face in the regions that they're in, such as Sudan, and the examples that we saw, I believe, from Uganda. But at the same time, I think it is upon all of us, UN, member states, businesses, investors, to address the core structural barriers that we face in achieving a green economy. Inequality, climate change, the destruction of ecosystems, these are all affecting our lives and livelihoods. Well before COVID struck, COVID has simply augmented that. And I'm really pleased to inform you that we do have several colleagues from the field. Mr. Selva Ramachandran from Sudan, Elsie Atafua from Uganda, Denise Antonio from the Caribbean, and also colleague Caroline Trench Sandiford from the Belize National Planners Association, who will help field some of the questions that you have. So just to get right down to it, there are several tipping points I think that we need to address here. Socioeconomic inequality, the scale and impact of misdirected subsidies, the recognition of the planetary crisis that we're in, climate crisis, biodiversity loss. I mean, these are all well-known threats that we've all been grappling with, inequality and so on and so forth. And of course, debt, capital flight, trade, these are all important ingredients here that matter in the context of the recovery efforts. So we cannot talk about recovery without taking these issues into account. But at the same time, we also have to call it where things have to be called out, because at the same time, we're facing a point where there are the wrong kind of things happening. Right now, if you look at the kind of stimulus packages that are out there, they're still predominantly going towards fossil fuels. So one has to ask the fundamental question, are we serious? Are we really serious about what we mean here when we talk about green recovery? If we have the very ingredient, which is to stimulate the kind of recovery that we need, going towards the very things that are most harmful for the future that countries are facing. So we really have to change the way the entire narrative, the entire value chain of ingredients that go into this topic of recovery, if we are really to move beyond business as usual. Now, the key principles underpinning UNDP's work are also very well known to many of you. Of course, the work on the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, are critical, and UNDP has been leading the way in supporting countries to ensure that their ambitions and aspirations vis-a-vis the climate convention are fully realized, and our climate promise work has been instrumental for that. And that's important to set the stage for the kind of transformational changes that are needed. But it's also an opportunity to identify viable pathways to build forward better, as Ulrika said. We definitely have to understand what these pathways are, because they're not going to be the same everywhere. And they must be followed up with targeted assistance. Without the kind of resourcing that is needed to support what needs to be done, there will be difficulties in making these kinds of changes, because we also understand that fiscal space to make the shifts that are required are becoming increasingly limited. And of course, at the end of the day, this must connect with jobs and job creation, strengthening livelihoods and resilience, because without that, the benefits of what we're talking about will not be felt by those that really do need to make the kind of transformations that are needed. Now, what we've done in terms of thinking about our offer on green recovery, and this is really to support countries with what are their priorities, what are we hearing from them. We've organized it into essentially several buckets, if I may use that term. One, of course, as Adriana mentioned, is to essentially ensure that we address the zoonotic threat that is very much prevalent upon us. This is just a beginning of something that we expect to become even more prevalent in the future, because of this conflict between humans and nature, which has increasingly becoming worse and worse. And the risks of transmission are simply going to increase. So we need to tackle that. The second is to ensure that we make smart investments in nature-based solutions, that governments, partners, communities are provided the kind of support that they're needed in order to ensure that there's a symbiotic relationship and working with nature that can sustain livelihoods, that can sustain people who are at the margins of society. And economic standing, so that they can overcome those challenges and improve on many of those conditions that they find themselves facing. And of course, also minimize some of the negative impacts on conservation and community engagement, which we know has been greatly deployed. And nature-based solutions can definitely play a huge role in the kind of recovery that we're looking for. It can be a stimulus essentially for those at the margins, and it can also help address many of the other issues that we are concerned about as far as zoonotic threats are concerned. The foundations of nature-based solutions, I think, is integral for any green recovery discussion. The other, of course, is to address the issues relating to climate change. And here there are a number of assessments that are underway in the context of supporting countries to address their national NDC requirements and aspirations. A number of assessments that are underway that can help pave the way and the pathways for the green response and recovery efforts. So we must make better use of that. We need to ensure that we invest in climate smart responses, whether it is in disaster risk reduction or climate change adaptation. These have fundamental bearing and importance for the kind of recovery that's needed. And then, of course, this is also about investments for the long term and investments in energy, investments in green energy, in renewables, in making use of carbon markets, fossil fuel subsidy reform. These are also essential parts of the puzzle that a number of countries are now looking at, whether they be considering temporary basic income, where's the money for that going to come from, potentially looking at redirecting fossil fuel subsidies, which currently are not necessary in many a context, and to make effective use of limited public funds where they're needed, but also to use it as an opportunity to drive in private sector investments, which will be critical for the kinds of development and progress that we need to see, be it on energy or agriculture, food security, and the like. And then the third big bucket, of course, is on energy. This is going to be critical for many countries as they come out of this recovery phase that they will face once they get through the immediate crisis situation. And of course, that also sets the stage for the longer term green recovery needs. And here, what we want to focus on is to provide assistance, targeted assistance, to ensure that, first and foremost, there is power to help treat patients and protect healthcare workers. Eventually, when a vaccine and so on is available, we'll need energy to ensure that there's proper storage and that the distributions of these vaccines can take place. So it's important to ensure that rural, health facilities and clinics are capacitated, because right now, even if a vaccine is available, storage is a problem. So getting it out to where it's needed is going to be a challenge. We also need to ensure that the digital, solutions are brought to bear, so that the transitions that we're also taking, that's happening right now, can be supported. We're all, working from home, but this is not just a New York syndrome, it's everywhere. The fundamentals are shifting, and digital solutions are going to play an incredibly important role. And perhaps one of the positives, if there's any positive that we can take from this, is the fast tracking of some of these changes in terms of the digital revolution in how we work, what we do. I think that has now taken place, and for many, it's not a question of going back to what it was. It's about how do we build from where we are. And then, of course, making sure that there's affordable, clean energy sources that can fuel the economic recovery is going to be critical for most developing countries. So in a nutshell, these are the sort of the main ingredients of our green recovery effort, which is working towards responding to these country requests. Now, what are some of the key ingredients of this? I think what's important for countries in order to capitalize from the opportunities at hand, we would sort of organize them into 5 areas. One is having market intelligence, the analysis of what's required for the kinds of systems transformations that are needed, analysis that will help inform and the kind of direction that countries need to take. That has to be in place, and current support efforts on the climate through the climate promise are ways in which that support can be provided. There has to be risk assessments done, feasibilities done, economic assessments done, so that they can help inform the kinds of investments that are needed. Without those fundamentals, the investments are not going to flow. So it's important to help countries get that basic data and evidence base together. This is going to require conversation among a multitude of stakeholders, whether it's private sector, banks, civil society, government, the public. We must make sure that we create the platforms for those conversations so that the right solutions that are fit for purpose take place. We also have to look at new financial products and fiscal policy support, because clearly with fiscal space being limited, unless we also introduce new solutions that will unlock the kind of financing that's needed, it's going to be quite a challenge. So debt for nature swaps, insurance, social bonds, cash transfers, these are all important ingredients that countries are now grappling with, and we get a lot of requests for support to help them unpack and understand which of these might be fit for purpose. And of course, you know, we need feedback loops, because at the end of the day, this is an unprecedented event and an occurrence that we are facing, one that's not going to disappear overnight, but one which is going to stay with us for a while. So it's really important that we are able to ensure that we learn from what we're doing and build off of that. So in our expectation is that if we can help countries identify the risks and opportunities through diagnosis, help make these kinds of public policy and budgetary decisions, we can help them make the shift and put the right incentives in place towards the pathway that we all like to see. So in a nutshell, that is really you know, our offer. What I want to do now is to really try and bring in some of my panelists into this conversation. And as I said earlier, I have 4 to help me with this. Now, one of the questions that's come from the chat is here on sort of UNDP's role in finance for development, building back better, UNDP's role in supporting green jobs, especially in Africa. I'd like to bring in Elsie, who is our resident representative in Uganda. Elsie, could you perhaps give a little bit of an overview of what's happening in Uganda on nature-based solutions, job, livelihood creation, and the kind of support that's being requested from government? Elsie?
Excellencies, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Pradeep and colleagues. Uganda is a very interesting case. And again, greetings from the Pearl of Africa. In terms of opportunities that we see, despite the challenges that have been talked about, and I don't want to repeat that, there are a couple of things that we are seeing in terms of UNDP's role in facilitating green jobs. First, let me say that our role as an integrator, providing a support platform to the UN system where we can be able to support a number of initiatives at the same time is very, very important. The second thing is around partnership brokering, helping countries working with private sector, UN agencies, civil societies, and perhaps finally on capacity building. Now, let me try to give a bit more of meat on the bone. What are we doing practically? 2 weeks ago, Pradeep, we launched with the president of Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni, a Youth for Business facility. Now, the facility seeks to support young entrepreneurs, and Uganda has the second youngest population in Africa. 78% of the population are below the ages of 35. Now, what this facility seeks to do, we are providing a grant window of $10 million. We are partnering with Stanbic Bank to provide $200 million in concessional loans below market rate. Now, the catch is that for the SMEs that have lost their jobs to bounce back and to recover, and this is where we're talking about green jobs, they need to make sure that whatever enterprise that we are going to support, either through the concessional loan or through the grant facility, it's more aligned to the green recovery agenda. So we are looking at tourism, for example, we are looking at agriculture, for example, we're looking at renewables, for example, because Uganda will lose $5 billion in 5 years. So that's a practical way in which we are supporting the young people of Uganda. We expect to support 20,000 of them and at least 50,000 retooled through this facility. The second thing we're doing, also very creative, that we launched a couple of months ago with Jumia, a UNDP Jumia vendor app. This is the first time it's happening in the history of Jumia. Jumia is the largest e-commerce platform here in Africa. Now, what is it doing? It seeks to digitalize the trade value chain. So I can now sit in the comfort of my home and order my tomatoes, my pepper, my onions, which has never happened. Now, what are we doing? We are creating jobs for the young people, the vulnerable women, the disabled, the persons with disabilities. They are getting jobs as a result of that. What we are also doing at the same time is that we are also responding to the green recovery agenda. In other words, people who would have been crisscrossing the city of Kampala to buy their things from the market, the normal market, not the supermarket, you are able to do that from home for the very first time. It's the first time we are connecting market women, men to the digital agenda. We are seeing an incredible growth rate. Over 1,200 vendors are already subscribed to it. And in fact, the market is good. So we've created jobs, but at the same time, also we are reducing emissions, for example, from transport, because people are not moving across. And secondly, when we started this business, we saw that, they were using plastics, for example, to deliver the goods. We said, no, we created a new business line now on the degradables. So again, you can see where we are going when it comes to creating new jobs. But what is important, which I wanted to highlight, Excellencies, is our work, which Eureka talked about, UNDP's work as a technical lead on the socioeconomic assessment. Now, this becomes very important for the recovery of the country and, of course, the resilience building of the country. We as UNDP made sure as a technical lead that we are not only looking at the socio-economic dimensions, but also we are looking at the environmental, the energy dimensions, using energy, using climate, using nature as a catalyst to facilitate the socio-economic recovery of the country. Now, this has become quite important for a number of reasons. Uganda is now developed its third national development plan, which is going to propel the country in its development agenda in the next 5 years. And what we have done is to make sure that as we talk about the socioeconomic assessment, but importantly, the recovery of the country, we have also tied it to the National Development Plan and made sure that the 18 programs that the government is going to implement in the next 5 years integrate into that issues around green recovery. The fourth thing, if I do have time very quickly, is our work with the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contributions. We've been doing some great work with the private sector. And in fact, last week we did have some substantive discussions with private sector, big private sector companies, those into waste management, those into renewables, and to see how we can work with them to reduce their emissions moving forward. And one of the things they've requested from us in response to your question, Pradeep, if we can establish, for example, a facility, a climate for development facility, or an NDC facility that enables us to de-risk some of the investments. So for example, Coca-Cola wants to invest or the breweries want to invest, but they will need some incentive to do that. And here is where UNDP comes in terms of our partnership with government, discussing the kind of incentive, stimuli that needs to be provided to these private sector actors to be able to work with that. So there are a lot of things that we are doing. I know that there are a couple of people who have to speak, but certainly these are some of the things that we are doing in the area of creating jobs and livelihoods to support. What we are currently doing finally in terms of the tourism agenda, because that is very key. The country depends on this and it provides the highest in terms of GDP to the country, is to help the country bounce back again. We are in discussions, for example, now with the EU to see what we can do and design a dedicated, if you may call it so, offer in the area of tourism currently that we are working on to support the country. So overall, there is a lot of things that we are doing as UNDP, but a couple of things in terms of where the needs are. There are things that the governments are saying, Pradeep. One is in the area of disaster risk reduction. I think when COVID came, for a country like Uganda, which is landlocked, was battling locusts at the same time, battling floods at the same time, the national systems when it comes to disaster risk management was found wanting. And therefore, there's a lot that we have to do. And UNDP, in fact, we are doing that now. We're just also partnering with Bill and Melinda Gates on this to strengthen the government's capacity to predict some of these disasters, but importantly also to not only centralize it, but we should have systems at the local level to do that. And as we speak currently, we're supporting them on some of the capacity building when it comes to the districts.
Thanks, Elsa. I want to bring in Denise at this point because you touched on issues concerning youth, disaster, livelihoods, which obviously are critical ingredients and issues everywhere. But I think they also resonate well with some of the requests that we're seeing from the Caribbean. Denise, do you want to say a few words in terms of what the requests are from governments in that part of the world? Over to you.
So thank you very much, Pradeep, Eureka, and Adriana, and the entire team for have me represent the Caribbean in terms of the work that we're doing. A lot of the work that we have been doing, I would speak for both a bit of Jamaica as well as the Belize, which I serve actually separate countries. Is that in Belize, for example, we have been working with the civil society and organizations, and I think Carolyn is here to talk a little bit more about what we're doing, working with women to actually do solar in their villages and with the indigenous communities to build their capacity in terms of providing that renewable energy and energy efficiency that they need. We've also been doing some work on the biogas and renewable energy for biomass and organic waste. How do we take what is being used as a waste to be able to help them in terms of even converting their use of charcoals into biofuels? In Jamaica, we have been working with the youth through a lot of the work that's been done in the small grants program. For example, in the recent grant that we have youth dealing with climate smart technology, agricultural technology that they're doing, and this is being led by the youth in their community. We have a situation also in another rural community where we're looking at sustainable livelihood with youths and the honeybee business, and it's being solarized. We also have another initiative that has been done in the communities where the youth are putting solar lighting in their communities, in the streets. And what does that does is that it's not only supporting in terms of having a greener economy, but it's also supporting in the issue of safety and security. As you know, the crime and violence in Jamaica is very high, and these youth are taking the initiative to see how they can do that. They're also looking to see how they can help power and use the waste to recycle the waste in the communities. How are they going to teach people to use their waste in order to be able to have a more greener economy? So there are a number of initiatives that we're doing, and the government has seen some of the work that we have done, and they want to scale that up in some of their initiatives that they're doing from government side. So we see the youth as the one to lead the charge in terms of what do they see their future being. And I just want to share something that we did for the very first time. We had started an initiative with the Human Development Report that came out last year. But because of COVID, we could not have the launch. And we were working with the university with 6 youth groups, and 3 of them were coming from University of the West Indies, from the Northern Caribbean University and the University of Technology in Jamaica. And what we started doing when the COVID report came was we asked them, what kind of world do you want to see? And it was amazing. We had a development launch where these young people actually gave good suggestions in terms of education, environment, and we actually had a challenge, and the one on schools actually won it. But it was to have the youth lead this charge and see what kind of skills as a result of COVID that they need to be able to build their skills and reskill them, not only the existing workforce, but also the future workforce. So what do they need in their way of environment, technology, in order to shape the world that they want to see in the future. So there are a number of initiatives that we're doing. We're also working with the private sector. We have recently started a collaboration with the private sector of Jamaica to see how we can work in the area of building youth in terms of safety and security, but also in terms of how their livelihood can be transformed in greener economies, so that they can be better equipped for tomorrow. Lastly, to just also discuss on the issue of, we are working with the government of Jamaica in terms of renewable energy and energy efficiency in a number of the hospitals, because we see that Jamaica and the Caribbean is very dependent on fossil fuel. And so how do we help them merge and transition into having a very cleaner environment when they're so reliant on it, knowing very well that the Caribbean is very vulnerable to the impact of climate change. So how do we help these countries under the multi-country office in Jamaica, which are 5 countries, and also in Belize, to transition from fossil fuel into more a greener economy and more to a sustainable way of living that's more green, that's greener and cleaner, knowing that there are challenges in these countries with water access. As you talked about COVID, these are some of the major things we're talking about. People are concerned about their basic needs, access to cleaner water, electricity. We talk about washing hands and keeping your hands clean. If people don't have the basics to drink, they're not going to be concerned about washing hands. So how do we help the countries harvest their water? And that's what we're trying to do in a number of the initiatives that we have been doing and that we will continue to do in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Denise. I want to bring in at this point Caroline, Caroline, who's from the Belize National Planners Association. Caroline, I think being at the forefront of the kinds of needs that are needed and the interactions you've had with us at UNDP, are we actually, responding to the kinds of needs that you are seeing coming from your constituents? Caroline? Do we have Caroline connected? Okay, there we go. Okay, great. Hi,
I had to unmute myself. Thank you, first of all, for the opportunity. And I want to add to what Denise has said in that for the Belize Association of Planners and UNDP Belize, we have been pioneering community resilience within urban environments. Denise spoke to some extent of what is taking place in the rural environment, which has been the traditional approach to addressing environmental issues. Now we are pioneering what we can do within urban communities, particularly community resilience. And we've been working on community resilience in 3 demonstration projects. And what we have been looking at is how you use data to assess gaps and deficiencies. And it is using that data in particularly that in responding to COVID, you were able to put together what we call the intersection of vulnerabilities within particular communities. Working with community mobilizers, working with communities, civil society organizations, how you integrate your work within a space to be more efficient, to be more effective, but to make the solutions more on a low carbon development pathway. And that pioneering work that we have been doing with UNDP in Belize has sort of set a foundation as to how you can move forward, because the recommendations and the strategies that came out of building the community resilience, whether you're dealing with people, ecosystems, governance, infrastructure, the solutions are all linked to green economies and green pathways. And so when you start talking about, for example, gaps in the supply of electricity, then the solution becomes, yes, providing and meeting that gap and deficiency, but through the use of solar energy. The reality is that it is really at that ground level that you're looking at the solutions, both in terms of, like I said, the green energy, but also in terms of green economy. Because if you start talking about transforming these communities from energy, environment, livelihoods, and so on, you can then start responding to capacity needs in terms of livelihoods. For example, if we start talking about housing renovations, with 65% of the housing in some of these communities are of poor quality, sitting on the ground, very exposed to disasters and risk. Then you start talking about rebuilding efforts, which links green efficiency materials. So every thematic area that we looked at in terms of transforming these communities into little hubs of prosperity, social well-being, economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, we looked at tying in green energy into green economy, into green livelihoods, and so on and so forth. But more importantly, what it also did was to look at let me just say that our mandate fits into SDG 11, and we also link it to SDG 17, which is partnerships. So we started to look at how you can create partnerships, not only at the national level, but at the local level between the community, between the state, and between the private sector. And that in itself sets the foundation to moving towards a more low carbon resilient pathway.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. I want to now shift from the Caribbean to Sudan, where I know there's been a lot of exciting work taking place in the context of the solar revolution. And I'd like to give the floor to our resident representative there, Selva, to perhaps share with us what the requests from government are for assistance and how have we gone about responding to that. Selva?
Thank you, Pradeep, and hello everyone from Sudan. What I like to do is, before getting into what the government requests, and more than government requests from civil societies, I want to put a little bit of context. Where are we in terms of Sudan? You have seen from the video, Sudan is really at a crossroads. There was a people's revolution happened between late 2018 to 2019. 30-year-old regime is out, a new transitional government is in, and the new transitional government has inherited all the problems of the past. What are the problems? 70 to 80% of people are in poverty, 1.8 million people IDPs, pockets of conflict in the country in different places, fuel shortages, bread shortages, daily there is 7 to 8 hours of electricity cuts. These are to name some of the challenges. So the transitional government has inherited these challenges, and they have to meet the expectation of the people. If they don't meet the expectation of people, then we will see people back on the street again. We also monitor the social media very, very carefully. What are the issues coming up from the people, and particularly youth and women who led the revolution? One key issue that come up is the issue of energy, because when you don't have 7 to 8 hours of electricity every day, that we are talking about Khartoum. The rest of the country doesn't have access to electricity. 65% of the people in the country do not have access to electricity. So this has become a major issue and a major demand from the people of Sudan, that they want access to electricity. And electricity means just not electricity in terms of SDG, it brings everything together. It's going to improve quality of life. So we have been doing a small pilot program through GA funded program called Solar for Agriculture, tested in one state. And that has attracted a lot of interest. That has become almost like a tourist center. People all around the state come to see what's going on in this Solar for Agriculture program, because people over there now can plant, and the season, they're not depending on the season. Whole year they can plant. High yield. And people are benefiting, and the people are saying, these are the kind of things we want. We have engaged the banks right from the beginning. We know if we want to make a transformational change, this has to be done on a big scale. The banks are ready to provide loans. But the issue is, when we talk about solar, everything is upfront costs. The lowest interest rate in the country is 13%. The farmers are saying, sorry, we can't afford it, and we want. Some farmers, whoever can pull their resources together on their own based on this experience they're doing. But generally, people could not go forward, and we will not make any transformational changes if this is not gone on a larger scale. So in that specific state, we worked with the state government and Ministry of Finance, and they started providing some subsidy to lower the burden of the farmers so the farmers can take loans. And that has started. And that discussion now going for the overall in the country. And we are talking about off-grid over here. I'm not talking about on-grid. Off-grid solutions basically to support the farmers. And the transition governments wants to show also that they're connecting with the people and they're helping the people and going to meet the expectation of the people. And that's where we started pushing the whole idea of National Solar Transformation Program. Through this example, the government caught it, they bought it, and we had an interministerial meeting to push this idea, but challenges are there. When we start and when we move, out of the 4 ministries, interministry that we work, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Water Resources, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Energy, 3 ministers changed in the last 2 months. So you restart again all over your relationship. But the idea is to launch a national solar program and have a kind of revolving fund so that that can provide subsidy over and above the loan that farmers will get. So farmers can take a lower amount from bank and the subsidy will keep in, and they can have the solar pumps for them, and then they pay back to the solar fund. That's the whole idea. It's a very simple idea. And now it's also gaining traction because as part of the transitional government, one of the big challenges, they have to remove the subsidy, which is heavily subsidized in the country for fuel. So we are also saying, if you take out the subsidy from fuel, why don't you channel it to solar? So then the real solar transformation program can happen. That's what's going to create the job. That's what's going to create a new industry for the country. Overall, it will benefit. Huge interest from people. And to support this, we also launched a solar testing lab so that we don't bring lousy products to the country. Once you bring lousy products and it doesn't work, the farmers will not believe. So that we put it in our social media. My God, the kind of attention we had for the solar testing lab. And people saying, this is what we want from the new transitional government. So I'm speaking with a passion because this is what we see. I've stayed in the country for 5.2 years. I'm leaving soon. I feel this is the way to go. It's not going to solve the entire problem in the country, but the green job, the green economy, agriculture, which is the main source of income, if we can work towards this direction, we will succeed. but we cannot do it alone. This has to be owned by the national government. That's where we are supporting the national government to move forward.
Thank you so much, Selva. Thank you so much. So there you have it. There's a cross-section of wonderful examples of support that is currently underway. That you know, certainly is the beginning of what needs to happen. A lot more that needs to be curated and supported. But we're already getting into it. With that, I would very much like to hand over to Adriana, perhaps for a few reflections before handing back to Ulrika. Adriana?
Thank you very much, Pradeep. Thank you very much to all panelists. Such passion, such commitment. It is like demystifying the concept of green economy. Sometimes we add restrictions to with the word green. Whenever the word green comes in, people think about restrictions and about constraints. I think we heard now from the field, the voices from the field. This is about opportunities. This is about an increased and historic opportunity to bring all the strands of sustainable development agenda together, to bring the economic resilience, to bring the environment sustainability, to bring the social justice together. And it is, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than examples of this work from the field. And I would like to thank my colleagues for bringing this and instill this passion and sense of hope and possibilities. So thank you. Over to my dear friend and colleague, Ulrika.
Thank you so much, Adriana, and thank you, colleagues, and not least also thank you for those of you who have been with us today. I think that these quick conversations, they are rich and there is so much more to say and share with you, but also, as I said at the very beginning, we need to do this in partnership with colleagues in the UN system and beyond, and we really want you to see that these kind of dialogues are just a starting point of the co-creation process that we would like to see together with our partners, also ahead of the strategic plan that we are entering into now, the strategic plan process. So with these few words, I would like to invite you also to be with us tomorrow at 8 a.m. where we will have the 4th installment of our COVID-19 offer presentations, and where you will hear from our colleague leading the work on governance in UNDP's Policy Bureau, Sarah Lister, and the conversation that we're having internally, but also with partners on the importance of strong institutions, governance, and civic engagement in our response. An area very close to the heart of UNDP that we also need to make the best use of as we work with the green economy. So I hope that we can have you back, or that you would like also to invite other colleagues that you think would have good use, and never hesitate to contact us. As I said in the beginning, we're proud to be the most transparent development agency. Our policy resources are your policy resources. Let's work together to really move forward instead of in reverse, and show the world that we can move towards a more sustainable future. Thank you very much, everyone, and hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.